Hey friends, I'm Mike. I met my wife, Jessica, at a local diner about 6 years ago. She was working as a waitress there while finishing up her degree in nursing. One day, I walked in for breakfast and she took my order. We started chatting, and from that moment on, I knew she was something special. Her smile lit up the room, and we just clicked. After a few months of dating, we were inseparable. We got married in a small ceremony with close friends and family. It was perfect, just what we wanted. Life seemed to be going great. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood, adopted a dog named Buddy, and everything felt like it was falling into place. Jessica worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and I had a steady job as an accountant. We were living the dream, or so I thought, but then, about a year ago, things started changing. Jessica became distant, spending more time on her phone and coming home late from work with vague excuses. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was stressed from her job or just needed some space. But looking back now, those were the initial signs of trouble. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home early to surprise her. As I walked into our bedroom, I heard hushed voices coming from inside. Curious, I quietly opened the door and saw Jessica on the bed, laughing and texting someone. I thought maybe she was just chatting with a friend, so I didn't think much of it at the time. But something about that moment stuck with me. Fast forward to last week. I was cleaning up some old boxes in the attic when I stumbled upon a hidden drawer in an old dresser. Inside, there were letters and photos, intimate ones that made my blood run cold. The letters were from someone named Tom, and the handwriting looked eerily familiar. It took me a moment to realize that Tom was our neighbor. I was shocked, confused, and heartbroken all at once. How could this be happening? Our own neighbor? The person I trusted implicitly, aside from Jessica. The letters detailed their secret meetings, stolen moments, and even explicit descriptions of their sex. Reading those words felt like a punch to the gut. So, there I was, holding those damning letters and photos, my heart pounding in my chest like it was about to burst. My mind raced with questions, disbelief, and rage. How could Jessica do this? And with Tom of all people? Our neighbor. The person I waved to every morning while taking out the trash, the guy who helped me fix a fence last summer. The person I trusted implicitly. The betrayal felt like a knife had been plunged into my chest. That I didn't know what to do at first. Should I confront her right away or wait for the right moment? But as the night wore on, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let her lie her way out of this. That evening, when Jessica got home, she walked in like everything was normal. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and asked how my day was. It took everything in me not to explode right then and there. Instead, I waited until we were sitting down for dinner. I watched her take a bite of her food, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Jessica," I said calmly, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." She looked up from her plate, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What's wrong now, Mike? You've been acting weird lately." I placed the letters and photos on the table between us. Her face went pale instantly. For a second, I thought she might bolt from the room, but instead, she just stared at them, her mouth hanging open in shock. What is this?" she stammered, her voice trembling. "Don't play dumb, Jessica," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "These are letters from you and Tom. Detailed descriptions of your affair. How long has this been going on?" For a moment, she was silent, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Then, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms defensively. "Mike, this isn't what it looks like," she said, her tone shifting to something more defiant. "Tom and I, it's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, incredulous. "You call having sex with our neighbor complicated? What the hell, Jessica? How could you do this to me?" She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes like I was overreacting. It's not like you're some saint, Mike. You've been distant for months. I needed someone who actually paid attention to me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to blame me for her cheating? The audacity. So, you decided to sleep with Tom because I wasn't paying enough attention? I shot back, my anger boiling over. That's your excuse? That's rich, Jessica. Real rich. Her face hardened, and she stood up from the table, glaring at me. Fine, Mike. If you want to be like this, fine. But don't act like you're the victim here. This marriage hasn't been working for a while, and you know it. Before I could respond, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I sat there, stunned, staring at the letters and photos scattered across the table. The reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. My wife had cheated on me with our neighbor, and now she was acting like I was the problem. The next day, I tried to get back to my routine, but every task felt like wading through quicksand. I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I saw Tom outside, watering his lawn or walking his dog, I felt a surge of anger and disgust. How could he do this to me? To our friendship, a few days later, I ran into him at the grocery store. He smiled and waved, completely unaware of the bombshell that had exploded in my life. I forced a smile and nodded, but inside, I was seething. As he passed by, I heard him whisper, "Hey, Jess mentioned you've been acting strange. Everything okay?" That did it. I turned around and confronted him right there in the aisle, ignoring the curious glances from other shoppers. "Everything's not okay, Tom," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You know damn well what's going on." His face paled, and for a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Mike, save it," I cut him off. "I know everything. I found the letters. I know about the sex, the lies, the whole thing. How could you do this to me? To us?" Tom looked down, shame written all over his face. "Mike, I'm sorry. It just happened. We didn't mean for it to go this far." "Didn't mean for it to go this far?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're sleeping with my wife, Tom. How does that happen by accident?" He opened his mouth to say something, but I shook my head and walked away, leaving him standing there amidst the canned goods. I left the grocery store that day feeling like I was walking through a fog. My mind was a chaotic swirl of anger, disbelief, and overwhelming sadness. How could this have happened? How could Jessica betray me like this? And with Tom, of all people, our neighbor, someone we trusted enough to borrow tools from and share backyard barbecues with. The initial shock gave way to an uncontrollable rage. I couldn't stop thinking about the details in those letters, the intimate descriptions of their encounters, the stolen moments they shared while I was at work or asleep in bed. It felt like every corner of our home was now tainted by their betrayal. Even simple things, like sitting on the couch or walking past the spare bedroom where I imagined they had sex, made my stomach churn. But beneath the anger, something darker began to take root: sadness. A deep, soul-crushing sadness that made my chest ache with each breath. I mourned the relationship we once had, the trust we built, and the future we planned together. It was like watching someone you love die, except they were still alive, walking around like nothing had changed. The nights were the worst. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Jessica with Tom. Their laughter, their stolen moments, their sex. It was like a movie playing on repeat inside my head, and I couldn't stop it. I tossed and turned, feeling more and more isolated with each passing hour. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and utterly heartbroken. Jessica's behavior didn't help matters. She barely looked at me anymore, let alone spoke to me. When she did, her tone was cold and dismissive, as if I was some inconvenience she had to deal with. One evening, after another sleepless night, I decided to confront her again. I needed answers, even if they hurt. "Jessica," I said quietly, standing in the doorway of our bedroom. "We need to talk. She glanced up from her phone, her expression bored. "What now, Mike? Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why did you cheat on me with Tom? Did you ever really love me?" She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes like I was overreacting. "Mike, don't be so dramatic. This isn't about love. It's about needing something more than what you were giving me. So, you chose to have sex with our neighbor because I wasn't paying enough attention?" I repeated, my voice rising. "That's your excuse? That's rich, Jessica. Real rich." Her face hardened, and she stood up from the bed, glaring at me. "Fine, Mike. If you want to be like this, fine. But don't act like you're the victim here. This marriage hasn't been working for a while, and you know it." Before I could respond, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. The weight of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. She was right, it hadn't been perfect. We had our ups and downs, but I never imagined anything like this. Not with Tom. Not with our neighbor. Days passed, and the tension between us grew thicker than ever. I found myself withdrawing, not wanting to engage in any conversation that might lead to another argument. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was her lying face, her bitchy attitude, and her blatant disregard for my feelings. It was suffocating. One evening, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. The cool autumn air hit my face, and for the first time in days, I felt a semblance of peace. As I walked through the neighborhood, I replayed every moment leading up to this point. Had I missed signs? Was there something I could have done differently? The guilt gnawed at me, making me question everything about our relationship, but then I realized something important: this wasn't my fault. No matter how distant or preoccupied I may have been, nothing justified what Jessica did. Cheating is a choice, and she chose to betray me with our neighbor. That fact alone was unforgivable. As the days turned into weeks, the anger slowly started to fade, replaced by a deep sadness and a sense of loss. I mourned the relationship we once had, the trust we built, and the future we planned together. It was like watching someone you love die, except they were still alive, walking around like nothing had changed. A few weeks had passed since the confrontation, and I was still reeling from the emotional roller coaster. The house felt like a tomb, every room echoing with memories of what we once had. Jessica and I barely spoke anymore, our interactions reduced to curt nods or one-word answers. She'd taken to spending more time away from home, often coming back late at night, sometimes not at all. I didn't even ask where she went anymore. I knew the silence between us was deafening, but it gave me time to think. To really consider what I wanted moving forward. Could I ever trust her again? Could I look at her without seeing Tom's face, knowing what they had done behind my back? The answer, as much as I tried to ignore it, was no. One evening, after another sleepless night, I sat down at our dining table, the same place where everything had unraveled just a few weeks ago. I pulled out a notebook and started writing. I listed all the reasons why staying in this marriage made sense: our shared history, the life we built together, the memories. But then I wrote down the reasons for leaving. Trust broken beyond repair. Betrayal by someone I loved and trusted implicitly. And worst of all, betrayal by our neighbor. As I read through the list, the weight of reality settled on my shoulders. There was no way I could stay in this marriage. Not after everything that had happened. It wasn't about pride or revenge, it was about self-respect. I couldn't live in a relationship where I constantly questioned every move she made, every word she said. I needed closure, and I needed to move on. The next morning, I waited until Jessica was home. When she walked through the door, I stood up from the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. She looked surprised to see me there, probably expecting me to be at work. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. She sighed, rolling her eyes like she always did when she didn't want to deal with something. "What now, Mike?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. Jessica, I've thought long and hard about this. About us. And I can't do this anymore. Her expression changed instantly, shifting from indifference to anger. Do what? What are you talking about? I'm talking about ending this marriage, I said firmly. I can't trust you anymore. Not after what you did with Tom. I don't know if I'll ever be able to. She crossed her arms, her face turning red with fury. So, this is it? You're just going to give up on us because of one mistake? One mistake? I repeated, incredulous. This isn't a mistake, Jessica. This is a choice. You chose to betray me, to have sex with our neighbor. How can you call that a mistake? She opened her mouth to argue, but then stopped, realizing she had no defense. Instead, she turned away, her shoulders slumping in defeat. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw a glimmer of regret in her eyes. But it was too little, too late. I'm leaving, I continued, my voice softer now. I'm packing my things and finding somewhere else to stay. We can figure out the details later, but right now, I need space. I need time to heal. Without waiting for a response, I walked into our bedroom and started packing a bag. Clothes, toiletries, anything I could carry. As I zipped up the bag, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It was finally over. The toxic cycle of lies and betrayal was breaking, and I was free. When I came back out, Jessica was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. She didn't say a word as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Before I left, I turned around one last time. Goodbye, Jessica, I said quietly. Take care of yourself. And with that, I walked out, closing the door on the life we once had. Finding a new place to stay was harder than I thought it would be. Every rental listing seemed to remind me of the home I had just left, filled with memories both good and bad. Eventually, I found a small apartment near the park where Buddy and I used to take our walks. It wasn't much, but it was mine a fresh start. Moving in was bittersweet. As I unpacked my boxes, memories of Jessica kept creeping up: our wedding photo, a framed picture from our honeymoon, even some of her old clothes I had forgotten about. Each item felt like a punch to the gut, reminding me of what I had lost. But instead of dwelling on them, I made a conscious decision to let go. I donated most of her belongings to charity and packed away the rest in a box labeled Memories. It was a symbolic gesture, but it helped me move forward. As the days passed, I found myself focusing on self-improvement. I joined a gym nearby and started going every morning before work. At first, it was just about getting in shape, but soon enough, it became my sanctuary. The physical exertion helped clear my mind, and I found solace in the routine that I also began seeing a therapist. Initially, I was hesitant. I didn't want to seem weak or vulnerable. But after a few sessions, I realized how beneficial it was to talk things through with someone who wasn't directly involved in the situation. My therapist helped me understand my emotions better, guiding me through the stages of grief and anger. She reminded me that it was okay to feel hurt and angry, but she also encouraged me to channel those feelings into something constructive. Another crucial step in my healing journey was reconnecting with friends and family. During the worst of the ordeal, I had isolated myself, too ashamed and broken to reach out. But once I started opening up, I realized how much support I had. My best friend, Alex, invited me over for dinner almost every weekend. We'd grill burgers, watch sports, and just hang out like we used to. Those evenings were exactly what I needed: a reminder that life could still be fun and enjoyable. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself sitting alone in my new apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The initial shock and anger had started to fade, replaced by a more reflective, contemplative state of mind. It was during these quiet moments, sipping coffee in the morning or taking long walks with Buddy, that I began to piece together the lessons I had learned from this harrowing experience. The first thing that hit me was how blind I had been, not just to Jessica's affair, but to the cracks in our relationship that had been forming for some time. Sure, We had our ups and downs, but I had always assumed that love and familiarity would be enough to carry us through. I now realized that communication, the lack thereof, was at the root of so many of our problems. We had stopped talking about our feelings, our needs, our desires. Instead, we let things fester, allowing resentment to build up until it became an insurmountable wall between us. I also recognized the importance of trust. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. No matter how much I wanted to believe that Jessica's actions were just a mistake, deep down, I knew better. She had chosen to betray me, not just once, but repeatedly, with Tom, our neighbor. That kind of betrayal cuts deeper than anything else. There was no coming back from that. Another lesson I took away was the power of self-worth. In the aftermath of the affair, I had spent countless nights questioning my own value. Was I not good enough? Had I failed as a husband? But over time, I came to realize that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's opinion of me, not Jessica's, not Tom's, not anyone's. My worth came from within, from the effort I put into becoming the best version of myself. One evening, while flipping through a magazine, I stumbled upon an article about mindfulness and meditation. Intrigued, I decided to give it a try. I downloaded a guided meditation app and started practicing every night before bed. At first, it was difficult to quiet my mind, especially with all the lingering thoughts about Jessica and Tom. But with consistent practice, I gradually learned to let go of those intrusive thoughts and focus on the present moment. Meditation became another tool in my arsenal, helping me stay grounded and centered. As I continued to heal, I started making small changes in my life. I rekindled old hobbies that I had neglected during my marriage: painting, photography, even writing short stories. These creative outlets became therapeutic, allowing me to express the emotions I couldn't put into words. Every brushstroke, every snapshot, every sentence felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity. One of the most significant changes came when I finally stopped comparing myself to others. It was easy to fall into the trap of thinking that everyone else had their lives together while I was struggling to put the pieces back together. But the truth is, nobody's life is perfect. Everyone has their own battles to fight, their own demons to face. Once I accepted that, I stopped measuring my worth by external standards and started focusing on my own journey. As the months went by, I noticed a profound shift in how I felt about myself. I no longer cringed when I looked in the mirror or questioned whether I was deserving of love. Instead, I stood tall, proud of who I had become. I had faced the darkest parts of my life and emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. But perhaps the most important lesson I learned was about forgiveness, not for Jessica's or Tom's sake, but for mine. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing their actions or pretending everything was okay. It was about releasing the hold they had on me, about freeing myself from the chains of bitterness and resentment. And slowly, bit by bit, I began to heal. If I could offer any advice to anyone going through something similar, it would be this: don't be afraid to walk away. It's okay to admit when a relationship has run its course. It's okay to prioritize your own happiness and well-being. And most importantly, remember that healing takes time. Be patient with yourself, and don't rush the process. In the end, I realized that while love can be fragile, it is also resilient. And in the midst of heartbreak and betrayal, there is always hope for a brighter future. By learning to forgive, by embracing self-love, and by trusting in the journey ahead, I found peace amidst the chaos. After a few months of living in my new apartment, I started to feel like myself again. The pain was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it no longer consumed me. I had built a routine that brought me comfort and stability: morning runs with Buddy, evening meditation sessions, weekend dinners with friends. Life felt manageable, even if it wasn't always easy. But as time went on, I began to realize something important: I didn't want to spend the rest of my life alone. Sure, I was content with my newfound independence, but deep down, I missed having someone to share my days with, someone who understood me in ways that only a partner can. The idea of dating again scared me, though. After everything that had happened with Jessica and Tom, how could I trust anyone again? How could I let someone close enough to hurt me? Still, I knew that if I wanted to move forward, I had to take that leap of faith. So, one evening after a particularly good therapy session, I decided to dip my toes into the dating pool. I signed up for a couple of dating apps: Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, just to see what was out there. At first, it felt strange and awkward, like I was back in high school all over again. Swiping through profiles, crafting witty messages, and trying to figure out how to present myself in just the right way. But eventually, I got the hang of it. The first few dates were, well, let's just say they were a learning curve. There was Sarah, who spent the entire dinner talking about her ex-boyfriend and how he still texted her every day. Then there was Mike, yes, another Mike, who seemed charming at first but turned out to be a complete narcissist, constantly bragging about his job and his car. And don't even get me started on Jenna, who showed up half an hour late, ordered 3 courses, and then left without offering to split the bill. Each date was a reminder that dating in your 30s is a whole different ballgame. People come with baggage, emotional scars, past relationships, insecurities, and navigating that can be tricky. But despite the initial setbacks, I kept going. I reminded myself that finding the right person takes time, and not everyone is going to be a perfect fit. One night, after yet another disappointing date, I found myself sitting at a bar, nursing a drink and feeling sorry for myself. As I scrolled through my phone, I noticed a message from someone named Laura. We had matched a few days earlier, but I hadn't really given her much thought. Her profile was simple, no long-winded bios or overly curated photos, but there was something about her that caught my eye. Maybe it was the genuine smile in her pictures, or the fact that she listed hiking as one of her hobbies. Whatever it was, I decided to give her a chance. That we messaged back and forth for a while, getting to know each other before deciding to meet in person. When the day finally came, I was nervous but excited. I met Laura at a local coffee shop, and from the moment she walked in, I knew this was different. She was warm, friendly, and easy to talk to. We spent hours chatting about everything from our favorite movies to our dreams for the future. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely connected to someone, but as the conversation progressed, the inevitable question came up: what happened with your marriage? I had been dreading this moment, unsure of how to explain the situation without sounding bitter or broken. But instead of brushing it off or lying, I decided to be honest. I told Laura about Jessica, about the betrayal, about the pain and anger I had gone through. To my surprise, she listened without judgment, offering empathy and understanding. "I'm really sorry you had to go through that," she said softly. "It sounds like it was incredibly difficult." Her response caught me off guard. In all my previous dates, when I had mentioned the divorce, people either changed the subject or gave me unsolicited advice. But Laura's compassion made me feel seen, heard, and validated. It was refreshing, and it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find someone who truly understood me. Over the next few weeks, Laura and I continued to see each other. Each date felt more natural, more comfortable than the last. We went hiking, explored art galleries, and even tried cooking together. Slowly but surely, I began to let my guard down, allowing myself to be vulnerable with her. Of course, there were still moments of doubt. Old fears would creep up, reminding me of what had happened with Jessica and Tom. What if history repeated itself? What if I opened my heart only to have it shattered again? But Laura's patience and kindness helped ease those fears. She never pushed me to move too fast, always respecting my boundaries and giving me space when I needed it. One evening, as we sat on her couch watching a movie, she turned to me and said, "Mike, I know things haven't been easy for you, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. No matter what happens, I'll support you." Her words hit me hard. It had been so long since someone had shown me that kind of unconditional support. With Jessica, everything had always felt conditional, like I had to earn her love and attention. But with Laura, it was different. She accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. As the months went by, Laura and I grew closer. Our relationship wasn't perfect, there were still challenges and disagreements, but we worked through them together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Maybe love wasn't dead after all. Even as my relationship with Laura blossomed, there was a part of me that couldn't fully shake the past. The betrayal by Jessica and Tom had left deep scars, and no matter how much I tried to move forward, the weight of those memories still lingered. There were nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, reliving the moment I discovered the letters, the photos, the explicit details of their affair. And during the day, random triggers would set off waves of anger and resentment, seeing Tom mow his lawn, hearing Jessica's name mentioned in passing. It wasn't just the betrayal itself that haunted me, it was the betrayal by someone who was supposed to be close, a neighbor, a friend. The thought of them together, laughing, having sex, it made my stomach churn every time it crossed my mind. And while I knew intellectually that dwelling on it wouldn't change anything, emotionally, I couldn't help but feel consumed by it. Laura noticed the toll it was taking on me. She'd often find me lost in thought, staring blankly at the wall or snapping at her over the smallest things. One evening, after I had lashed out at her for something trivial, she sat me down and said, "Mike, you need to talk about this. You can't keep bottling it up." I didn't want to burden her with my baggage, but she was right. If I wanted to truly heal, I needed to confront these feelings head-on. So, I started opening up to her more, sharing the raw, ugly parts of my story, the nights I cried myself to sleep, the moments when I questioned whether I deserved better, the times I felt like I could never trust anyone again, but talking about it only got me so far. What I really needed was closure. And to get that, I had to face the people who had caused me so much pain. The first step was confronting Tom. We hadn't spoken since the divorce, and honestly, I had avoided him like the plague. But one day, I decided enough was enough. I called him up and asked if we could meet. He sounded surprised but agreed to meet me at a local park. When I arrived, he was already there, pacing nervously by the playground. Seeing him brought back a flood of emotions: anger, betrayal, disappointment. But I took a deep breath and reminded myself why I was there. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mike," he replied, his eyes avoiding mine. "Look, I know you're probably here to yell at me, and I get it. I deserve it." I nodded, biting back the urge to unleash everything I had been holding in. Instead, I took a seat on a nearby bench and motioned for him to join me. "I'm not here to yell," I said slowly. "I'm here because I need to understand. How could you do this? How could you betray me like that?" Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There's no excuse, Mike. I was wrong. I let my feelings for Jessica cloud my judgment, and I made a huge mistake. I'm sorry." His apology felt hollow, almost rehearsed. It was clear he was trying to minimize what he did, to make it seem like a lapse in judgment rather than a calculated betrayal. But I wasn't buying it. "You had sex with my wife, Tom. You betrayed our friendship and our neighborhood bond. That's not just a mistake. That's a choice. A conscious decision to hurt me." He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I know. And I regret it every day. I wish I could take it back, but I can't." For a moment, I considered letting him have it, telling him exactly how much he had destroyed me, how much pain he had caused. But then I realized something important: yelling at him wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't erase the past or make me feel any better. All it would do is keep me stuck in that toxic cycle of anger and resentment. So instead, I said, "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, Tom. But I'm done letting this eat away at me. I'm moving on, and you should too." With that, I stood up and walked away, leaving him sitting there on the bench. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, but it was enough. Enough to finally let go of some of the weight I had been carrying. Next came Jessica. Confronting her was even harder. Unlike Tom, she wasn't remorseful. In fact, she seemed almost indifferent to the whole thing, which only fueled my anger. But I knew I had to try. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. When she walked in, she looked different, thinner, more tired. But her attitude hadn't changed. "Why are we here, Mike?" she asked, sipping her coffee without looking at me. "I wanted to talk," I said, my voice firm but controlled. "About everything. About what happened between us." She rolled her eyes, a familiar gesture that used to drive me crazy. "What's there to talk about? It's over. We're done." "I get that," I replied. "But I need to understand. Why did you do it? Why did you choose Tom?" Jessica shrugged, her expression cold. "You weren't paying attention to me, Mike. You were always working, always busy. I needed someone who actually cared about me." Her words stung, but they also rang hollow. She was deflecting, trying to shift the blame onto me. But I wasn't going to let her get away with that. "So, your solution was to cheat on me with our neighbor?" I shot back. "That doesn't make sense, Jessica. That's not fixing anything. That's destroying everything." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Maybe I made a mistake. But what's done is done. You can't change it." "No, I can't," I agreed. "But I can decide how I move forward. And I've decided that I'm done letting you control my life. I'm moving on, Jessica. And you should too." Her face hardened, but she didn't argue. Maybe deep down, she knew I was right. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had finally found the strength to walk away from her toxic influence. In the weeks that followed, I worked hard on forgiving, not for Jessica's or Tom's sake, but for mine. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing their actions or pretending everything was okay. It was about releasing the hold they had on me, about freeing myself from the chains of bitterness and resentment, and slowly, bit by bit, I began to heal. The anger faded, replaced by a sense of peace. I realized that I didn't need their apologies or their validation. All I needed was to let go. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I began to notice a subtle yet profound shift within myself. The initial shock and pain had started to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. For so long, my identity had been intertwined with Jessica, her needs, her desires, her expectations. But now, as I stood on the precipice of this new chapter in my life, I realized that it was time to rediscover who Mike truly was. I started small, with habits and routines that brought me joy and fulfillment. I rekindled old passions like painting and photography, finding solace in the quiet moments where creativity flowed freely. Every stroke of the brush or click of the camera shutter felt like a step toward reclaiming my independence. These creative outlets became more than just hobbies. They were lifelines, pulling me out of the darkness and back into the light. But rebuilding self-worth wasn't just about external activities, it was also about internal work. I made a conscious effort to challenge the negative self-talk that had plagued me since the betrayal. Instead of dwelling on what I had lost, I focused on what I had gained: strength, resilience, and a deeper understanding of myself. Each morning, I wrote down 3 things I was grateful for and 3 positive affirmations about myself. It was a simple practice, but over time, it rewired my mindset, reminding me that I was worthy of love and happiness. Laura played a pivotal role in this journey. Her unwavering support and patience gave me the space I needed to heal without feeling rushed or judged. We continued to grow closer, sharing our dreams and fears, building a foundation of trust and mutual respect. With Laura, I didn't feel the need to be perfect or put on a facade. She accepted me for who I was, flaws and all, and that acceptance allowed me to embrace my true self. One evening, after a particularly meaningful conversation with Laura about our future, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I could see a path forward, a path filled with hope and possibility. As we sat on her couch, watching the sunset through the window, I took her hand and said, "Laura, you've changed my life. You've shown me that love doesn't have to be complicated or painful. It can be simple, pure, and real. She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. And you've changed mine, Mike. You've taught me what it means to truly care for someone, to stand by them even when the world feels like it's falling apart. In that moment, everything felt right. The past no longer weighed heavily on my shoulders, and the future seemed bright and full of promise. But as fate would have it, life has a way of throwing unexpected curveballs even when you least expect them. A few days later, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a familiar voice crackled through the line. It was Tom. "Mike," he said, his tone urgent. "We need to talk. It's important." My heart sank. What could he possibly want now? After everything we'd been through, I thought we had both moved on. But something in his voice told me this wasn't just another apology or plea for forgiveness. "I'm listening," I replied, my grip tightening around the phone. "It's Jessica," Tom said, his voice trembling. She's gone." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, gone?" "She disappeared," Tom explained, his voice breaking. "She left a note saying she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. She packed a bag and just vanished. No one knows where she is." I stood there, stunned, unable to process what I was hearing. Jessica, the woman I had once loved, the woman who had betrayed me, was now missing. The irony was almost too much to bear. All this time, I had been trying to let go of the past, to move forward, and now it was coming back to haunt me in the most unexpected way. Tom continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I know this might sound crazy, but I think she did this because of us. Because of what happened between us. She couldn't handle the weight of her own actions." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do now? Should I try to find her? Should I let her go? The questions swirled in my head, leaving me dizzy and disoriented. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights below. Buddy lay at my feet, sensing my unease but offering silent comfort. I thought about Jessica, about the life we had shared, and the pain she had caused. But more than anything, I thought about Laura, the woman who had helped me rebuild my life, piece by piece. In the end, I realized that I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo what had happened with Jessica and Tom. But I could choose how I moved forward. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what that choice was. The next morning, I called Laura. When she answered, her voice was warm and inviting, as always. "Hey, Mike. How are you doing?" "I'm okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Listen, there's something I need to tell you. About Jessica. She's gone." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a soft sigh. "I'm sorry, Mike. That must be hard for you." "It is," I admitted. "But it's also a reminder that some things are beyond our control. And what I've learned is that I don't need to hold on to the past anymore. I have you, and that's enough." Laura's voice softened. "You're right, Mike. You deserve to be happy. And I'm here for you, every step of the way." As we talked, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges to face. But with Laura by my side, I knew I could handle whatever came my way. In the end, the story of my marriage, my betrayal, and my journey toward healing wasn't just about loss or pain. It was about growth, resilience, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that no matter what happened, would face it with strength, courage, and an open heart.